Welcome to In the Now with Jim Swilley. Does anybody remember what movie this was from? I See Dead People?
Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense.
Yeah, you know, when I went to see The Sixth Sense, this is going to be a spoiler alert, but I went to see it by myself. And I had to go to the bathroom the whole movie, and finally I thought, I can't put it off any longer. I've got to go. And when I left, it was the ending. I came back, and people were leaving, and I was like, what happened? What happened? And people were like, Bruce Willis was dead. What? I didn't see that one coming at all. The reason I want to bring it up, I was teaching on this the other day about, I was referring to the cloud of witnesses. You said you just taught on it at your church. And I was talking about, under Moses' law, Moses forbade people to speak to the dead. But do people actually die? And if they're still existing on the other side, Jesus said, who do men say that I am? And they said, well, some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah or one of the prophets, which would mean they obviously believed in some sort of reincarnation for them to even say that. And Jesus didn't rebuke them. Jesus didn't say, I can't believe that. He just said, well, who do you say that I am?
And that was in the Jewish community. That wasn't, who he was talking to.
Right.
Or,
Right.
Our heritage belief-wise.
Right. And then, Saul goes to the witch of Endor to talk to Samuel, and Samuel speaks to him.
Pops up.
Yep.
And the amazing thing is on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus is there, and suddenly Moses and Elijah appear, and the disciples knew who they were. If I were talking here and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin appeared, I'd be a little taken aback.
Right.
And they were like, should we build a tabernacle? So it makes you wonder, was there a time in history where people were coming in and out of, the current reality, which brings us to the whole thing about the now and the I am, and does time really exist, and all those things that quantum physicists are asking about. When it comes to people who are coming from a spiritual paradigm, what were you saying the other day? You said you felt like you had a visitation.
I did. Me and a couple of my friends were going to go up to Washington D.C. for the weekend. We had opera tickets, and it was a couple of weeks ago. And the Tuesday before we were going to leave on Friday, the Tuesday before we were going to leave, I got a call from my mother, and I have a cousin who is under investigation. We'll just say it that way. And I'm not going to say it, but it's bad. And the night before we were supposed to leave, I talked to him on the phone. He said, that I just found out they've issued warrants out for my arrest, and they're coming any minute now. And I talked to him for about an hour, and I was trying to encourage him, and he was just distraught. And these charges, they are really bad. I mean, they're really bad. And I didn't know what to think. And him and I had the same grandfather. And I loved my grandfather. I think you loved my grandfather too, Burl. And we would stay up till late hours of the night. We would talk about philosophy and politics and theology, and we just had such a bond. And he loved Washington D.C. and wanted me very much to go and see this particular museum in Alexandria. The name is irrelevant, but he wanted me to go, and so I made it a point to go. So we're driving up on Friday, and I kept thinking, dear Lord, not that I'm in judgment of my cousin, but I thought, dear Lord, if my grandfather was here and could see this, he would just be absolutely inconsolable. I mean, it would. I don't know what it would do to him. And so we got to Washington. We saw a few monuments. The next day, we went to this museum that he had told me about. And as I'm walking through the hallways, looking at the exhibits, I'm telling you, I just felt him there. I can't explain it. I didn't see him. I didn't smell him. He was just there walking next to me, and I kept feeling from the other side, I know what's going on with your cousin, but I don't see it the way you do. I see everything from this realm.
Did it give you peace about the situation?
Completely. Yeah. I just got peace about it, and I just said, you know what? It is what it is. I don't know how this is going to play out. And let me just say, in our court system, you are innocent until proven guilty, and these allegations have not been proven. And I don't know what to think. He says he didn't do it, but I'm walking through this hallway, and I just got peace about it. Because I was envisioning my broken-hearted grandfather, and my grandfather just was there, and he was like, I'm not broken-hearted, and I do know what's going on, and you just need to relax.
It's interesting if you, tell me if any of you relate to that. I know you lost your dad not too long ago, and a lot of times when people have, I don't know if lost is the right word, but they've transitioned. I'm trying to think of other words besides died, because
Crossed over.
I don't really think people
don't
die.
die.
And whatever your idea of heaven is, if it is another dimension, it's just on the other side of something, that's right here.
Yeah,
And in Hebrews 12, it says we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. I mean, how literal is that? I mean, if God, if Jesus, if angels appear to us from that realm, is it permissible and possible to communicate? Anybody ever had experience like that?
Well, if you don't mind, Jim, I had, when I was probably 8 years ago, I was ministering in South Carolina, and I'd never been to this church before, and the pastor and his wife on the front row, and I'm just prophesying, and all of a sudden, I heard this voice in the back of my head, and I never entertained the idea of talking to the dead. I heard this voice in the back of my head, and instantly I felt as if the heavens opened up, and God said, I want you to speak to her about her mother. And I heard her mother's voice in the back of my spirit. And I told her, I said, your mom says, baby girl, blah, 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 without thinking my theology here. I didn't think this out, so I started talking. She falls to her knees and said everything you said, from what my mother called me to everything was what my mother, did in her life. And my mother just passed away like 5 days ago.
Wow.
And they kept it from me because of the fact they wanted me to focus on the energy of the room. I'm coming to preach. And another one was just recently with Patrick, where when his mother died years ago, I was doing my own thing, and all of a sudden I heard his mother speak to me. And here's what Jesus showed me, is we're all one body, and if you get in a mass of water, and you have half of your body in the water and half of it out of the water,
It's
you're
still
one body.
Yeah.
And so why, and if the head speaks, and the head doesn't stop here and says, I can't speak any further to my legs, because the legs are in the
That's
water.
good.
And so it's that concept of realizing that in Christ, we are all wrapped up in that feeling, that knowledge, that knowing, that being of who He is. And so knowing that, it's a place of, why can't we speak to those? And one thing that James Gall once told me, which was really true, he said, don't ever say that that they're more alive in Christ than you are, because of the fact you think because they're now crossed over. He says, that's not true. We're all alive equally in Christ, so therefore one is not better than the other. We're all alive. And why can't we talk to those people? And the way he phrased it was very interesting. He said, it's not that you're going and you're saying, I'm channeling the voice of so-and-so to speak to me. What you're doing is you're allowing your life to be opened up in Christ, for Christ to be able to say, look, since you're in me and they're in me, then they have access to you to speak to you, and vice versa.
That's good stuff.
And so therefore, he opens the door to say, I need you to tell somebody something from this point of view. Sure, no problem.
Well, I tell a lot of times when somebody in the congregation has a death in the family, or whatever I'm going to call it, I will say to them, the scripture says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And especially if you had some unresolved stuff with them, then just believe that you're going to hear from them in the next few hours or whatever. And invariably somebody will say, they visited me in a dream, or I had an impression. Or, like you said, you suddenly were aware that your grandfather was with you. It's not like you saw him, but you were aware. And it produced really what prophecy is supposed to produce. Like when you look at somebody like Jonathan Edwards? Some of these guys that, what he says to people edifies, exhorts, and comforts them.
It does.
Do you know? And it's like they have a sense that their person is still aware of them and can speak back to them. When Jesus said, who do men say that I am, in that context, what does that say to you? I mean, when he says, some people think I'm somebody else. And Jesus himself said, you can't bear this right now, but what does he say? John the Baptist is Elijah. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's a clear case for reincarnation. It's not that it happens every time, but obviously Malachi prophesied that Elijah would return in the spirit, and then Jesus said, well, this is what's going on here. This is Elijah, and he's returned, but he did say, if you can receive it.
Right.
Because a lot of folks weren't able to receive it, and they're still not able to receive it.
And I'm not trying to be controversial bringing up this topic, but it punches a lot of buttons with people, and they think of Hinduism, and are you saying I'm going to come back as a monkey or a dog or whatever? But even the concept of going from glory to glory is technically reincarnation. You're saying you die on one level and you come back as something else. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking about the thing is, the difference in what we're talking about in the Hinduism point of view is just that would be dying to then perfect, to live, to try to attain perfection.
Right.
While we are approaching our relationship with God and the spirituality from a place of perfection.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect, maybe in every aspect.
Right.
But in my relationship with God, everything's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not going to get any more righteous. I'm not going to get any
Right.
more saved.
Right.
I'm not going to get any more anything like that.
Great point.
Yeah, I think we definitely go from glory to glory, even in this realm of life. Every day is a born again process, but you have to have a death to be born again. And so we're constantly needing to kill off those old mindsets, kill the Clark Kent so that the Superman can live in our lives. And I think that's a daily thing that happens.
Yeah, I think when Jesus said you must be born again, I don't think that's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
There's something, I've done hundreds of funerals, probably haven't counted them, but people inevitably say, Mama would have wanted. Mama would have wanted that casket, or Mama wouldn't have wanted you to do so-and-so. Mama still wants. Mama didn't quit wanting. And I try to explain to people.
Don't speak of them in the past
Yeah,
tense.
Mama, it's not that Mama would have wanted the $5,000 casket. Now Mama lives in a place to where her mind is clear, and she wouldn't want y'all to go in debt for the $5,000 casket. She'd just want to be burned up and thrown off the side of a boat or something. So I help people save money at the funeral home. But the point is, like my mother and I didn't have the best relationship because she didn't understand me, and she thought she had a way of fixing me, and I didn't need fixed. I was okay. But now my mother knows the truth. When she
Right.
passed from life through that veil into greater life, she didn't die. She passed to a greater place. But what I believe is that she passed through the consuming fire of God, which perfected her and burned up the wood, the hay, the stubble, the opinions, the doctrines, the mindsets, the mental illness, all that burned up, and what was left was perfection.
Now we
And
know in
she
part, but
sees
then
me.
shall we know,
Yeah.
even as
And I
also
think when
we
people even get a glimpse of it, whatever that next realm is, which obviously we haven't been there, we can't say, but we know from others' experiences when they get a glimpse, they usually don't come back. Apparently it's beautiful, apparently it's exciting, apparently it's magnificent. And even like that movie you said that you saw where the kid had passed away or saw himself above his own body and then came back. What
Oh,
was
yes,
sort
that
of the
true
experience
story
on that?
about
Grandmother had that
Heaven
happen.
is Real. Did you see that? It was
Yeah.
really good.
I haven't seen it, but I know the story.
It was really, really good. And this kid, he was a pastor's son. And it's a book that came out a few years ago. They made a movie about it. And he really has an out-of-body experience. He's technically died on the, and you hear this all the time. You hear about people
Right.
going toward a light and whatever. That's really nothing new. But what was interesting about this kid is he came back and he said he was telling them things that there's no possible way he could have known otherwise. One of which was the parents, the mother had miscarried before he was
Yeah, I
born,
was gonna say that.
and he's like 4, and he talks to the mother and he says, "I met my sister," and she said, "Yeah, your sister's," because he had another sister. She's over there. He said, "No, I'm talking about the one that died from your tummy, or left from your tummy, or whatever." And there's no way he would have known that. And he said, "She hugged me and told me to tell you that she's okay." And he goes to the dad and he says, "I saw you," he said, "I was above my body and I saw you in another room yelling at God." And his father was in there, saying, "Don't take my son," that sort of thing. And I keep, from all these other areas, I keep seeing confirmation to things that we believe by the Spirit. And let me tell you why I think it's important. Not that we're going to be having seances and that kind of stuff, but the more you realize that the spirit realm is everywhere, and that it's not separate from you, and that you're not trying to get to heaven when you die, you're from heaven. It's why Jesus said, "Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Whatever you loose on earth is what is already loosed in heaven. I have been released on the earth because I was released in that realm first. And I think it affects the miraculous. I think it affects prayer. I think it affects how we communicate with one another.
Yeah.
Because the fact that I can, like if I call you and say, "Man, I've had you on my mind so much the last few days," is that you coming to me doing this,
Yeah.
saying, I need you to pay attention to me, and I'm picking that up by the Spirit.
Right. Well, even the concept of time, and Brandon could probably touch on this. When it says that Jesus was crucified before the foundation of the world, like what? You know what I mean? That's such a that concept is mind-boggling. But when you look at time, and we're here for 70, 80, 90, some of us 100 years,
Right.
that's so small on the grand scheme of things. Now we have emotions, so we're like, oh, mom and them passed or whatever like that, and it is sad, and we go through those things. But in the grand scheme, it's just not even a moment. On the Cosmos show I referred to on our earlier episode, they said if the universe was 1 year old, like let's look at it on a calendar year, so they go by like January, February, March. They said that humanity's only been here for like an hour on the last day of that year, and it's amazing when you look at time in that way. And Brandon probably touched. It's not. We've almost created time. Time is bigger
Well,
than
what is it in
humanity.
Ecclesiastes 3? He says he has planted eternity in men's hearts.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Einstein proved through general relativity that space and time are actually one. He actually referred to it as space-time. And he also proved mathematically, he actually proved it in an experiment with an eclipse as well, that space-time can be bent, slowed down, warped. It's actually much more fragile than we realize. We believe in this, we're under this illusion that we live in this linear time-bound realm. There's a start point, an end point, and it's completely set in stone, and there's nothing you can do about it. That Einstein proved that differently. He actually, later work actually proved that around the edge of a black hole, that time will actually start to slow down. That's what theory of relativity is. This is when you approach the speed of light, time actually, if you're in a spaceship going the speed of light, the time actually goes slower inside that spaceship.
Well,
One day with the Lord is as 1,000 years.
years. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, but they've actually had that even with just normal space travel with clocks that had been synchronized, not being synchronized on return.
Yeah.
Wow.
They have.
So, yeah.
Well,
But the other thing,
it gives you a whole different perspective of, believe you receive when you pray. The other thing was?
no, I was just thinking, and we just had mentioned it obviously, that Paul, we think of death as this big tragic crossing over so much, and it's kind of cataclysmic in its way. But Paul said, if you're absent from your body, you're present with God. And we are also present with God while we're in our body. So the transition is actually quite minor.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And heaven isn't off far away, and God's not off far away, because if the moment I step out of my body, I'm with God.
Exactly.
Right.
And what you said, heaven is not far away. Let
Right.
me touch on that, because I think the idea that heaven is far away goes back to an early conversation that we did about how the Zeus thunder
Right.
god distant is way over there. We don't want to make him angry. It all falls into that mindset. It's
Right.
way over there. We're separated. Well, we're not separate. We're surrounded by it.
Right.
And I like what you said. It's a minor transition. Seeing it that way, we realize that it's been in the midst of us the entire time.
Yeah.
It's always been there.
When my mom died in '99, she was in a pre-death coma. The doctor said she's done. You won't hear from her again. Later that night, she's sitting up in the bed. So we all ran to her bedside, and she looked around the room at us, but she looked above us and said, "There's Elsie." That was her sister that had died
Yeah.
25 years before. "There's my mom, and there's my Jesus." And she was seeing the two
Right.
layers as they overlapped. And then she asked permission. She said, "They want me to go with them. Can I
Wow.
go?" So we gave her permission to go, all but Dad, and he was kind of broken up. And finally, she looked at me and she said, he didn't say anything. And I said, "Dad," and he said, "You can go." So she said, "Okay, I'll be right back," was one of the things she said. And she said, "Y'all don't come with me." I said, "We won't." So she closed her eyes, and then she said, "I don't have anything to wear." And that was, my mom had to wear something nice to go somewhere nice. So in a few minutes, I said, "It's all right. Well, you don't have to get anything to wear." So in a few minutes, she started doing these arm motion things, and the nurse said, "It's the morphine." But, she's doing her arms like this, and she's doing like this, and then she's working her fingers. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm buttoning up the robe Jesus put on me."
Wow.
And she buttoned that
Woo,
thing
chills.
off.
I
And
know,
see,
I feel it. I feel
then
it.
it was her putting her arms up through her robe, and she was slipping, and she buttoned it all the way to the top. And then she said, "Now I'm getting ready to go." And then she closed her eyes again, and then she opened them one more time, and she said, "Y'all don't come now." So we're coming later. She closed her eyes. The last thing she said, "Ooh, I've always wanted to see this."
Shoot.
And she was right there. To me, that was when I said, "Okay, it's real. It's real."
That's amazing.
And-
I don't know if I told you this, but, my Uncle Harry passed away last year. And he was, a true modern day prophet and just incredible man of
Godly
God.
man.
And as he was transitioning, he started seeing, like happens and you guys that have pastored know this, people start seeing loved ones coming to get
Yeah.
them. It happens
Yeah.
all the time. And he saw his his father, Pop Mashag, and he saw people, and he started saying things like, he said, it's like cellophane, it's like cellophane. And they said, what do you mean? He said, it's like I can see right through everything. It's like looking through cellophane. So he's laying there, and he said, I see, he finally saw Jesus. And, but what was interesting, he was laying there, and he said, they're coming to pick up the garbage. So they thought, well, he's just speaking out of his head or whatever. And my cousin goes over and looks out the window down beside the hospital, and garbage trucks were out there picking up garbage. He was starting to see, like he was going up above and starting to see in perspective. And he started saying there's a lot of traffic on the street. Like he was seeing, you know, a larger and larger place. And I love stories like that, you know. But it's interesting. I've got a guy in our church that his brother passed away last year. And they're both, you know, older gentlemen. And he said, my brother passed away unexpectedly, but he said, I remembered about a week ago, he and I were sitting on the front porch talking, and suddenly he said, he did like that, and he said, what are you looking at? And he said, I know this sounds crazy, but I could have sworn Mama was standing down there between those two cars on the street. And he said, you know, she passed away years ago. He said, I know, but I'm telling you, whatever, she was just standing there. And he said, I didn't think a thing about it. We kept talking. And he said, then a week later he passed. I said, well, she was coming to get him. So if you start seeing departed loved ones show up,
Go to the doctor.
Well, that's why I don't want to be, which by the way, you've never heard anyone say like, wow, I just saw hell and it was crazy and then I came back. But I don't want to be anti-hell. In fact, I don't want to be anti-anything. I want to be pro-heaven.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Jim, I was thinking earlier about talking about everything we're dealing with crossing over to spirit, hearing spirit, you know, wondering if they're here. It's interesting to me because you think of that telekinetic type of mentality of like, how do the birds fly and just in a moment they can shift like that?
Amazing.
How do fish do that and just, they don't communicate and say, come on guys, it's like instantly.
Yeah.
Almost like in a moment, a twinkle of an eye. It's that thing of what if there's more to us as spirits having a human experience that Jesus wanted to open up in us to say, there's more there. I mean, a thought travels 250,000 miles. There is so much power there to know. What if we really tapped into this to realize there's more to us that God created us to be than what religion is taught us?
And I think that's why we need to strip away the religious mindset. Because even, remember when the tsunami happened in Sri Lanka? The animals, days ahead, they knew it, and they went up higher ground. I think, well, then if animals can tap into that,
I agree,
which I believe is the mind of Christ, some people call it the force or whatever, then why can't we? And if we have this idea that heaven and earth are that separate, and one's a natural thing and the other thing's a spiritual thing, then we can't transition like that.
Well, we're trapped in this material plane, and we only can see between infrared and ultraviolet. That's the only thing we're able to see. But that is a 1% slice of a pie, and all the things we can't see, that's really more real. If this came from that, then that has to be more real than this.
Bro, they're on. I know I keep referring to Cosmos, but it's really a good show.
Is Cosmos paying you?
They're in
Well,
space. Hey, I would love to work with them, but they're in space, and Neil Tyson shows you that our eyes can only perceive certain things. We can only see so far. We can only see, and they put on a special kind of lens. I don't know the scientific term for it, and all of a sudden it opens up, and you see all these planets and all these stars. And he said we have to have that type technology to even see it. So perhaps we need to begin to think more like Christ and look in the lens of Christ.
Well, was it Elisha that was, remember his servant came to him and he said, there are all these people coming to get us, and he said, there's more of us than there are of them, and he said, open his eyes, and he opened up, and they were in the entire mountainside was filled with
So
chariots.
what eyes was that? It wasn't natural.
Yeah, exactly.
It couldn't be natural eyes.
Exactly.
Something beyond the five senses.
You know what gets me is like that refers to when Jesus prayed for the guy, and I love this story because when he prayed for him and with the mud and the spit, so to say, and the first time he opened his eyes, he saw men as trees, and like we're trees of righteousness, and so it's almost like he was able to see into the spirit, and yet Jesus was like, no, hold on. I'm paraphrasing here. I don't want you to see right now in the spirit. I want you to see in human form. But yet he was able and allowed to see that perception of us as spirits. Yeah, I was thinking, you were talking about sort of, we call it pre-existence, with the heaven is for real child seeing the daughter. When I did my book, which we'll plug, Abandoned to Divine Destiny, I did
available
at IdentityNetwork.net. But we had, I did a study on different people who actually had visions and dreams of seeing brothers and sisters who never came to earth, or seeing people who were waiting along the wall of heaven, so to say, waiting to come to earth. Wow. And if you think about it, it's not far-fetched when you think of the whole aspect of, starts with an M, Abraham, Melchizedek. Thank you. Ding, 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 Melchizedek. Blew my mind.
It's such a common name. Why can't you
Oh,
think of
I
it?
mean, all the keep. So Melchizedek was the same way. He neither had mother nor father. He was
Yeah.
never born into the earth,
Right.
but yet he was allowed to come here and just sort of snap back. And so there is a pre-existence of spirit that abides in the heavens. That when we do come here, we have that natural experience. And so why not connect to those who have not come here yet, or those who may never come here?
Well, one thing's for sure, I feel connected with all you guys. Thanks so much. This was awesome. Cool stuff.
Interesting.
Thanks for joining us on In the Now with Jim Swilley.